Our protagonist's name is Hallie, shows up at a summer camp for girls, and she quickly makes friends who seem quite interested in Hallie being in California. They inquire about her residence and whether she encounters Hollywood celebrities often, but Hallie states she leads an uncomplicated life with her dad. She also mentions they own a vineyard and her dad is her closest friend. Once she and her friends grab their bags, they go to their room. After some time, another girl named Annie shows up at the same camp in a fancy car with her butler Martin, and he doesn't seem very impressed that they traveled all the way from London for camp. But Annie claims she's confident it will be okay. Once Martin confirms that she is all she requires with her, they exchange their usual greeting, and he informs Annie that he'll see her in 8 weeks when the camp ends. Later that day, Hallie takes part in a fencing contest. She takes the round and is declared the unquestionable fencing champion in the camp. The teacher then inquires if anyone wants to challenge Hallie. No one speaks until Annie arrives and states she'll give it a shot. She wears her fencing gear, and the competition proves to be a challenging one as both girls are quite skilled. Eventually, Annie triumphs and pushes Hallie into a pool. Hallie isn't fond of this, and as Annie attempts to assist her up, she pulls her into the water as well. Everyone chuckles, and the instructor then requests them to shake hands after such a great competition. As the girls turn to greet each other, they notice that they resemble each other, and all the other kids are surprised to witness this too. Hallie begins to question why everyone is staring at them, and Annie replies it's because they resemble each other. Hallie still hasn't moved on from her loss in the fencing match, so she teases Annie, claiming they look nothing alike and that she's the more attractive one. Before they begin to fight, the instructor halts them and sends everyone away. That evening, Annie is winning against everyone in her room at poker. As her victorious streak goes on, Hallie arrives and confronts her. Annie appears quite sure of herself, and they both concur that the one who loses will leap into the lake after dark. Eventually, Hallie triumphs, much to Annie's astonishment. She leaps into the lake as intended, but Hallie dashes off with her clothes as part of a joke on her. The following morning, Annie gets her payback and places Hallie's belongings on the roof. They keep teasing each other, but Hallie appears to come out on top after triggering booby traps in Annie's room, with 2 of the teachers also falling prey. As a result, Annie and Hallie are taken to the isolation cabin. While they are present, the girls keep teasing one another. Yet, they quickly turn into friends when Annie assists Hallie in shutting the windows, as the wind begins to blow fiercely. At this moment, they begin discussing their origins. While Hallie mentions she resides with her dad, Annie replies that she lives with her mom. They find out that they both have parents who are divorced, and as they keep chatting, they also surprisingly learn they share the same birthday. The girls find it a quite fascinating coincidence, but they simply keep chatting. Soon after, while Hallie is outside, Annie inquires about what Hallie's mother looks like. Hallie claims she never encountered her, but her dad provided her with a photo. Interestingly, Annie has never met her father, and she only has a photo that was torn down the middle. Hallie understands that her photo is just like that, and as they quickly take it out to share with one another, they find out that they have the same parents and are twins. The girls also see that they have matching lockets and they embrace each other. That evening, as the girls discuss how their parents have not attempted to remarry since their divorce, Hallie comes up with a fascinating idea. She informs Annie that rather than going back to their own homes, they can exchange places. Hallie expresses that she is eager to see what their mom looks like in person, and since Annie shares the same feelings about their dad, they can do it quietly. She also mentions they need to do it to unite their parents since they would have to see each other again when they exchange the kids. Although her plan seems risky, Annie consents, and they choose to begin teaching one another about each parent and their various habits so that she can resemble Hallie. Annie needs to trim her hair and get her ears pierced. Hallie also picks up Annie's British accent and other details about Martin and their grandfather, who resides with their mom, Elizabeth. The girls discover a lot about one another, and on the final day of camp, they decide to keep in contact and also choose the ideal moment to arrange the switch so that their parents can reunite. With this, Hallie departs the camp in Annie's vehicle and makes her way to the airport. When she arrives at the airport, she spots Martin, who appears thrilled, believing it's Annie. Hallie appears to have picked up their unique greeting and she uses it with Martin. He quickly sees that her hair is short and she appears different, but Hallie mentions she simply chose to experiment with a new style. They quickly go home, and when Hallie arrives, she is eager to see her mom, Elizabeth. As she walks into the house and glances around, she spots her grandfather and embraces him warmly, saying she has missed him for such a long time. At that moment, Elizabeth calls for her daughter, and when Hallie spots her, she quickly rushes to embrace her, expressing that she has been waiting a long time to see her. She begins to cry, and when Elizabeth inquires about the issue, Hallie replies that she has missed her mom dearly. Elizabeth also sees her short hair and ear piercings, but Hallie mentions she chose to experiment with a new look. After some time, Elizabeth and Hallie begin to chat about how great the camp was. The phone quickly rings, and after Elizabeth picks it up, she inquires if Hallie would like to join her at work, and Hallie appears pleased to come along. When they arrive at Elizabeth's store, Hallie notices that she is a fashion creator. She also spots a beautiful wedding dress and inquires if Elizabeth created it. When she claims she did, Hallie can't believe how skilled her mom is. Hallie also notes that the dress would suit Elizabeth, who chuckles at the idea. After an enjoyable day that has Hallie appear in a photo shoot at Elizabeth's store, they make their way home. During their journey, Hallie inquires about her dad, and Elizabeth is taken aback by how unexpectedly her daughter is seeking her father. Hallie also inquires about how they met and the reasons they parted ways. Elizabeth mentions they lacked sufficient time for one another, and due to this, they chose to end things. As Hallie poses more inquiries, Elizabeth mentions she anticipated a day like that would arrive, and she's now prepared to share everything her daughter wishes to know about her father. In another place, Annie also gets to California and meets her father, Nick, who comes to collect her at the airport. She's really glad to see him, and after embracing him warmly, they get into the car to go home. While on their journey, Nick observes that his daughter's choice of words has unexpectedly shifted, and she's now speaking like a true English girl. Annie quickly states it's not a big deal, and she picked it up at the camp. Nick also inquires why she continues to say dad after each sentence, and Annie initially mentions she has been eager to say it for a long time, but she adjusts her statement and says she missed referring to him as dad for the 8 weeks in camp. Nick thinks this is amusing, and they quickly arrive home. There, Annie encounters Hallie's nanny, Chessie, who quickly observes that Annie is quite silent. She also mentions she senses something unique about Annie, but she can't quite identify it yet. To make things even more engaging, Chessie appears surprised as Hallie's dog barks at Annie, whose part as Hallie is currently seeming tougher than she anticipated. When they're in the house, Nick tells Annie that if she's done unpacking her things, he wants her to meet someone. At that moment, Annie spots a woman sharing a drink with Nick. While she's unpacking, she inquires Chessie about the woman. Chessie mentions that the woman's name is Meredith, and she's a publicist whom Nick employed to assist in establishing a solid presence for his business. Chessie, though, claims Meredith has been attempting to get nearer to Nick, and she may not have good intentions. Later that day, Nick presents Annie to Meredith. Annie does her utmost to scare Meredith, but she doesn't buy it. When Nick departs from the women, Annie also attempts to inform Meredith that Nick isn't fond of her, and he has many female friends. Meredith understands what Annie is attempting, but once more, she overlooks it. When Annie returns to the house, she calls Hallie, who conceals herself to answer the call. Annie informs Hallie about Meredith, and says they must accelerate their plan. Hallie mentions she's not prepared because she's still in the process of getting to know Elizabeth. Annie attempts to persuade her, but Hallie then pretends there's a network issue, and hangs up the call. When she steps out, Martin, Elizabeth, and her granddad notice her. She quickly claims that secretly chatting with someone on the phone was one of the lessons she learned at the camp. Although it appears difficult to accept, they don't inquire about her anymore. At the same time, Chessie inquires with Annie about the secret call, but she comes up with a solid reason for it. Later that day, when Annie and Nick take a stroll, she inquires about her mother. Nick is surprised to hear the question, and just as he inquires why she's curious, Meredith shows up with her assistant, Richard. Meredith inquires if Nick has informed Annie about their forthcoming wedding, but he replies that he's nearly ready and is attempting to gradually mention it. After informing Nick they'll meet again at lunch, she departs with as they depart, Meredith informs Richard that the first thing she'll do after marrying Nick will be to send Annie to a boarding school. It also appears that Richard is her actual partner, and they're collaborating to earn some money from Nick. After some time, Nick brings Annie to visit his vineyard. When they arrive, he begins discussing Meredith and inquires about Annie's opinion of her. Annie states she has no opinion and departs swiftly on her horse. When she arrives home, Annie begins to worry about Meredith possibly sabotaging her efforts to unite her parents. Unexpectedly, Chessie listens to everything and requests an explanation. Annie admits that she's not Hallie, and Chessie becomes emotional and requests a hug from Annie. Nick walks in and appears shocked to find Chessie in tears. Chessie claims everything is fine, and as she mentions she's going to make a delightful meal for Annie, Nick informs Annie he wishes to propose to Meredith. Annie begins shouting in French, and as Nick appears surprised, she quickly informs him she picked it up during camp. Annie then informs Nick he cannot marry Meredith, after which she rushes out of the house. Meredith quickly comes back to the house, and Nick informs her that Annie didn't handle the news well. She informs Nick that she'll attempt to persuade Annie, but when she goes to see Annie, she dislikes how Nick's daughter keeps asserting that she doesn't care for Nick. Annie mentions that she understands Meredith desires Nick's wealth, but Meredith becomes furious and states that nothing will prevent her from marrying Nick. She also advises Annie to stop attempting to persuade her to leave Nick. Soon after, Annie sends a fax to Hallie, including a notice that things are not going smoothly on her side. Martin is the one who notices it, but as he takes it to throw it away, because he doesn't comprehend it, Hallie spots it and quickly exits the house to contact Annie. Annie describes the situation and asks Hallie to update Elizabeth on their strategy before Nick's wedding. Hallie mentions she'll take care of it, but as she finishes the call, her grandfather happens to have overheard the whole discussion, and he requests an explanation from her. She shares everything with him, and that evening, he urges her to inform Elizabeth before it's too late. Even though she feels shy about it, Hallie shares with Elizabeth, who is surprised to learn that. She, however, appears pleased to see Hallie, and informs her that she and Nick chose to separate the kids as part of the divorce. Hallie informs Elizabeth that Nick wishes to meet her, and they need to depart for California. Elizabeth suddenly feels anxious, and even while she gathers her belongings, she has a hard time choosing what to put on, because she still has feelings for Nick and wants to appear attractive. Elizabeth and Hallie depart London with Martin, and they reach a hotel, which also happens to be where Nick, Meredith, and Annie are leaving for the wedding. As Elizabeth searches for her room, she spots Nick and understands he wasn't anticipating her. She quickly begins searching for Hallie and spots her with Annie and Chessie. Elizabeth expresses her frustration that they arranged for her to meet Nick, and the girls admit that they required him to meet her, as that's the only way he won't wed Meredith. Elizabeth doesn't seem keen, and she mentions the girls should inform Nick that she arrived to return them. She then heads to the restaurant, and while she's there, Meredith arrives as well. After some time, Meredith identifies Elizabeth as a famous wedding dress designer. She begins discussing her desire for Elizabeth to create her wedding dress, and Elizabeth consents, unaware of her identity. Later that day, Nick begins to wander the hotel in search of Elizabeth. He even tumbles into a pool, but spots her as he emerges. Before they can catch up, Hallie and Annie arrive to share how they organized everything from when they first met at the summer camp. At that moment, Elizabeth asks them to allow Nick and her a moment to converse. While they are by themselves, Meredith arrives and appears surprised to find her wedding dress designer with her fiancé. Before Nick can clarify, Hallie and Annie come back and inform her that they are indeed twins, and Elizabeth is their mom. Meredith doesn't handle this well, but she acts like she's fine with it. That evening, Hallie and Annie arranged a meal for their parents at the yacht where they first encountered each other. When Elizabeth inquires about how they managed to pay for it, the girls mention they received some assistance from their grandfather. At their reunion dinner, Nick and Elizabeth still appear to enjoy each other's company. Nick then inquires why Elizabeth departed from him, and she replies that a part of her anticipated him to prevent her. Nick claims he wasn't aware she desired that, but Elizabeth states it doesn't matter, and they can't disregard the idea of reuniting since he now has another person. The following day, Nick and Elizabeth get ready to depart from the hotel and head in different directions with the kids. However, Annie and Hallie won't go with them unless they have a camping trip together as a family. Their guardians have no option, and they choose to proceed with it. However, at the final moment, Elizabeth informs Meredith to take her place on the trip. The girls are not pleased with this, but she says it's best Meredith accompanies them because she's the one who is marrying Nick. The camping outing doesn't turn out great for Meredith, with the girls ensuring she becomes annoyed. That evening, they move her bed into the lake while she's asleep, and she becomes very upset when she notices what they've done. Meredith informs Nick that he must decide between her and the girls, and Nick quickly chooses his daughters. Meredith departs in anger, and Nick also comes back home with the girls. That evening, he brings Elizabeth to the basement and expresses his desire for them to reunite, but she doesn't believe it will succeed. The following morning, Elizabeth departs with Annie and returns to London. When they arrive home, Elizabeth is surprised to find Hallie in the house. Hallie mentions she and Nick took a really quick plane that got to London in half the usual time. As Elizabeth then confronts Nick and discusses how she dislikes the thought of dividing their kids, Nick states he couldn't pass up the opportunity to reunite after he erred when they initially separated. The girls appear quite joyful to witness this, as they caused it, and shortly after, Nick and Elizabeth tie the knot once more.